Their rulers accumulated titles until official introductions became miniature maps. An emperor might be king of Hungary, Bohemia, Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, Galicia, and Lodomeria. Archduke of Austria, Grand Duke, Duke, Margrave, Princely Count, and Lord of territories whose boundaries and constitutional meanings differed. The title list was not empty vanity. Each name represented a separate legal relationship. The crown of St. Stephen symbolized Hungary's historic kingdom. The crown of St. Wenceslas represented Bohemia. The Austrian archducal hat carried another tradition. Coronation in one land did not automatically satisfy another. Franz Joseph could be Emperor of Austria from 1848, but until he was crowned King of Hungary in 1867, Hungarian constitutionalists denied that their relationship had been properly restored. This layered system made Habsburg politics look chaotic, yet modern federal states face related questions. How much authority belongs at the center, how much to regions, and how citizens with different languages and traditions share institutions. The Habsburgs rarely solved the problem permanently. They improvised. A privilege granted during crisis became a precedent. A temporary military district lasted generations. A marriage contract determined the fate of a province. An emperor's personal promise could become constitutional memory. The monarchy was less like a machine designed at one moment than a city built over centuries, with Roman foundations, medieval streets, Baroque palaces, factories, railways, and electrical cables forced to coexist. The court gave this complicated realm a visible center. In Vienna, the Hofburg expanded from a medieval fortress into a sprawling complex of wings, chapels, libraries, offices, apartments, stables, galleries, and ceremonial rooms. There was no single architectural plan because each generation added what it needed. The palace itself became a metaphor for the monarchy. Courtiers navigated physical and social corridors. Access to the ruler could determine careers. Families sought offices such as chamberlain, lady-in-waiting, master of the horse, or court counselor. Rank was displayed through dress, carriage, seating, and the right to enter particular rooms. The Spanish branch developed some of Europe's strictest court etiquette. Philip II's household surrounded the king with controlled distance. Later Spanish Habsburg monarchs appeared in portraits almost motionless, dressed in black, their faces pale against dark interiors. The style projected majesty and self-command. Could also isolate rulers from honest information. A courtier who depended on favor had reason to soften bad news. Ministers competed to control documents and audiences. The king's sacred remoteness made him impressive and vulnerable. In Vienna, ceremonies served similar purposes but evolved with the Baroque court. Imperial weddings, baptisms, entries, funerals, feast days, hunts, operas, and religious processions displayed hierarchy to participants and spectators. The Corpus Christi procession placed the emperor publicly within Catholic ritual. Maundy Thursday ceremonies included the washing of feet of poor elderly subjects, presenting humility through carefully organized spectacle. Court life was theater, but theater can be politically real. It teaches people where authority sits and how society is imagined. Women shaped the dynasty far beyond the role of producing heirs. Mary of Burgundy carried a continental inheritance and fought to defend political rights against France and her own cities. Joanna of Castile remained the legal source of sovereignty even while confined. Margaret of Austria, daughter of Maximilian, governed the Netherlands with diplomatic skill and served as guardian of Charles V. Mary of Hungary, Charles's sister and widow of Louis II, also governed the Netherlands, balancing war, finance, and provincial privilege. These women were not exceptions hidden outside the system. Dynastic monarchy repeatedly depended on female regents because kings were absent, underage, ill, or dead. Margaret of Austria's court at Mechlin became a center of art, education, and diplomacy. She negotiated the so-called Ladies' Peace of Cambrai in 1529 with Louise of Savoy, mother of Francis I. Two royal women settled a conflict between Charles V and France when male rulers and commanders had failed. Mary of Hungary managed the Low Countries during years of religious tension and war, though her policies also supported repression. Archduchess Maria of Austria, Charles V's daughter, served as regent in Spain while Philip II was abroad. Across generations, princesses carried information, influence, objects, artistic tastes, and family loyalties between courts. Their marriages often demanded severe personal sacrifice. A girl might leave home at 14, travel to a country whose language she barely knew, marry a stranger, and face pressure to produce sons immediately. Her household would become a battlefield between attendants from her homeland and those of her husband's court. If she failed to conceive, blame usually fell on her. If she produced daughters, negotiations continued. If she died in childbirth, another marriage could be arranged. Royal portraits hide this vulnerability beneath pearls, lace, stiff bodices, and controlled expressions. Maria Theresa transformed maternity into public authority. Paintings and ceremonies presented her surrounded by children, suggesting abundance after the succession crisis. Yet each child was also a diplomatic asset. Her letters to Marie Antoinette combined maternal concern with political instruction. Control spending, influence the king, improve public behavior, and remember the alliance. Marie Antoinette's failure to satisfy those expectations became a source of anxiety long before revolution. The young queen in Versailles was not merely an extravagant celebrity. She was an Austrian diplomatic project watched from Vienna. Archduchess Maria Carolina, another of Maria Theresa's daughters, married Ferdinand IV of Naples and Sicily. She became politically influential, especially after the execution of Marie Antoinette. Fiercely anti-revolutionary, she supported alliances against France and tried to protect her kingdom's interests. Maria Amalia resisted her mother's instructions in Parma. Maria Cristina, Maria Theresa's favorite, received the rare privilege of marrying for love. The unequal treatment caused resentment among siblings and reminds us that even in a ruling family, power operated through parental affection as well as law. Habsburg childhood was disciplined by dynastic expectation. Princes studied languages, religion, history, military science, writing, dancing, and government. Their health was monitored because the survival of states could depend on a fever. Court physicians, confessors, tutors, and servants observed every stage. Children were painted as miniature adults, dressed in formal clothes to advertise continuity. Behind the images, mortality was constant. Smallpox killed or scarred royal children and repeatedly altered succession. Maria Theresa survived smallpox. Several relatives did not. She later supported inoculation after seeing its danger, helping legitimize a medical practice that many subjects feared. Disease shaped politics at every level. The Black Death and later plague outbreaks emptied towns and disrupted economies. Vienna suffered severe plague in 1679, commemorated by the Baroque plague column on the Graben. Smallpox killed Emperor Joseph I in 1711, changing the War of the Spanish Succession by making his brother Charles heir to Austria. Tuberculosis killed the Duke of Reichstadt. Pneumonia killed Karl in exile. Royal bodies were political institutions, but microbes ignored rank. Medicine at Habsburg courts mixed observation, inherited theory, superstition, and experimentation. Charles II's exorcisms show desperation rather than mere ignorance. Doctors of the period worked within frameworks available to them, often using bleeding, purging, restrictive diets, and remedies that weaken patients. Autopsies of royal bodies sometimes provided knowledge but also fed rumors. The separate burial of hearts and entrails followed religious and dynastic custom, allowing parts of a ruler to rest in places connected to family or office. Religion offered legitimacy and moral language, yet it also produced division. The early Habsburgs supported monasteries and churches partly from piety and partly because religious institutions preserved memory. Masses for the dead, tombs, donations, and saintly associations placed the family within sacred history. After the Reformation, Catholic identity became more central. The Austrian Habsburgs presented themselves as defenders of Catholic Europe against Protestant revolt and Ottoman expansion. Jesuit schools trained elites and promoted confessional renewal. Pilgrimage sites, Marian devotion, Baroque churches, and public rituals reshaped Central European culture. But Catholic monarchy was never spiritually uniform. Even inside the dynasty, Maximilian II's sympathies troubled Orthodox advisors. Rudolf II's court welcomed occult and heterodox interests, and Joseph II tried to subordinate church practice to state reason. Among subjects, belief was local and varied. Protestant communities survived secretly under persecution. Orthodox Christians negotiated privileges in frontier regions. Jews lived under changing arrangements of protection, taxation, expulsion, and toleration. Muslims remained in territories lost or gained through war and later formed a recognized religious community in Bosnia under Austria-Hungary. After the annexation of Bosnia, the monarchy eventually gave Islam formal legal recognition in the Austrian half in 1912, an unusual step in Europe at the time. Muslim soldiers served in the Imperial army, some wearing the fez as part of uniform. Their presence complicates the popular image of the Habsburgs as eternally fighting Islam. The dynasty had warred against Ottoman armies for centuries, but by the 20th century it governed Muslim citizens and incorporated their religious identity into imperial structures. The military frontier along the Ottoman border was one of the monarchy's most distinctive institutions. Habsburg rulers settled and organized communities, including many Orthodox Serbs and other refugees, in exchange for military service. Frontier inhabitants received land and particular freedoms while living under military administration. They guarded forts, patrolled borders, and supplied soldiers. The system created a population directly tied to the crown rather than Hungarian or Croatian landlords, generating long-term disputes over jurisdiction and identity. When the frontier was dissolved in the 19th century, its social and military legacy remained. War made the monarchy, but war also prevented it from becoming fiscally secure. Armies required cash, and cash required taxes, loans, and cooperation from estates. The Habsburgs borrowed from merchant bankers such as the Fuggers, Genoese financiers, Dutch and English lenders, and domestic credit networks. Sovereign defaults or restructurings did not necessarily end borrowing because lenders expected high returns and states controlled future revenues. Finance was a negotiation between rulers who needed money now and creditors who needed confidence in tomorrow. American silver became crucial to Spain, but its effects were complex. The great mines of Potosi in present-day Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico produced silver through systems that included coercive indigenous labor, wage labor, mercury processing, and colonial taxation. Treasure fleets carried bullion across the Atlantic under naval protection. Some silver stayed in Spain, much moved to bankers and suppliers elsewhere in Europe, and large quantities eventually reached Asia through trade, including the Manila galleons linking Mexico and the Philippines. Habsburg monarchy participated in an early form of globalization, connecting Andean labor, European war, Chinese demand for silver, and Atlantic shipping. The wealth carried terrible human costs. Epidemic disease caused catastrophic indigenous population decline after European arrival. Colonial labor systems disrupted communities. The transatlantic slave trade brought enslaved Africans to Spanish territories, and contracts connected to slave supply became objects of international diplomacy. Missionaries sometimes defended indigenous people against colonists and sometimes assisted cultural destruction. Colonial law recognized categories and rights while enforcing hierarchy. Any celebration of Habsburg global reach must include the people whose labor, land, and freedom made imperial grandeur possible. The Spanish monarchy's legal debates were nevertheless historically significant. The Valladolid debate of 1550 and 1551 brought arguments about conquest and indigenous humanity into formal discussion. Las Casas insisted on the rationality and rights of indigenous peoples, while Juan Gínez de Sepúlveda defended war and hierarchy using classical arguments. The debate did not end conquest, but it showed that empire generated moral criticism from within its own religious and legal system. Habsburg rule was capable of producing laws against abuse and equally capable of allowing abuse to continue when enforcement threatened colonial profit. In Central Europe, wealth came from land, mines, trade, manufacturing, and taxation rather than overseas colonies. Bohemian silver and later industry mattered greatly. Hungary supplied grain, cattle, wine, and minerals. Alpine regions produced salt and metals. The Adriatic ports linked the interior to Mediterranean commerce. The Danube connected markets while also forming military and cultural routes. Economic integration was never complete, but by the 19th century railways and customs arrangements made the monarchy a major common market. Railroads changed imperial perception. A journey that once required days in a carriage became a matter of hours. Officials could travel faster, armies mobilize more efficiently, newspapers circulate, and tourists visit distant provinces. Stations appeared as monuments of modernity. The Southern Railway connected Vienna to Trieste, giving the capital access to the sea. Lines across Bohemia and Galicia tied mines and factories to markets. Yet railways also strengthened nationalism by enabling activists, books, and organizations to connect linguistic communities. The postal system performed similar work. The Habsburgs had long relied on the Thurn and Taxis families' networks in the empire. Later state postal services carried letters across the monarchy with growing speed. Bureaucracy is often mocked as lifeless, but a reliable post allows families, businesses, scientists, lovers, and political conspirators to remain connected. The Habsburg state survived partly because it moved paper more effectively than its medieval predecessors could have imagined. Paper also allowed surveillance. Censors opened letters, banned books, monitored newspapers, and maintained police files. Metternich's officials feared secret societies and student nationalism. After 1848, the neo-absolutist state expanded records and policing. In the late empire, formal constitutional rights created more public space, but authorities still watched radicals, anarchists, nationalists, and socialists. Gavrilo Princip's world emerged partly from underground networks that crossed borders the state could not fully control. The army was another school of empire. A Czech conscript might serve under a Polish officer beside Hungarian, Romanian, and German-speaking soldiers. Commands were standardized, but regiments used multiple languages. Military service could create loyalty, resentment, or both. Officers learned to navigate regional difference, and many developed a professional identity centered on the emperor. The navy, based at Pola and other Adriatic ports, brought together Italian, Croatian, Slovene, German, Hungarian, and Czech personnel in an institution that seemed unlikely for a land-centered dynasty yet became technologically sophisticated. Habsburg uniforms contributed to the empire's visual mythology. White coats, colored facings, gold braid, shakos, helmets, hussar jackets, and later field gray distinguished units and ranks. Military music filled public squares. Parades displayed coordination and loyalty, but the battlefield stripped away elegance. At Solferino, Galicia, the Isonzo, and the Piave, uniforms became soaked with blood and mud. Dynastic spectacle repeatedly sent ordinary bodies into wars chosen by elites. Peasants formed the majority of Habsburg subjects for most of the dynasty's history. Their lives rarely appear in royal portraits, but they paid taxes, supplied food, performed labor, housed soldiers, and endured requisitions. Relationships with landlords varied by region. Some villages possessed communal rights and strong bargaining traditions. Others faced heavy robot labor obligations. Maria Theresa and Joseph II tried to regulate burdens partly to protect productive taxpayers and recruits from noble exploitation. The abolition of serfdom and feudal dues around 1848 changed legal status, but poverty and land hunger continued. Rural culture preserved languages and customs that later national activists transformed into political symbols. Folk songs, costumes, dances, legends, and religious practices were collected and displayed as expressions of national identity. Imperial ethnographers and exhibitions also catalogued diversity, sometimes respectfully and sometimes through stereotypes. Franz Joseph's jubilees featured delegations in regional dress, presenting the peoples of the empire as a harmonious family around the monarch. The image was beautiful and incomplete. Cities offered different possibilities. Prague's German and Czech institutions competed and overlapped. Lviv, known as Lemberg under Austrian rule, included Polish, Jewish, Ukrainian, Armenian, and German influences. Trieste contained Italian, Slovene, German, Greek, Jewish, Serbian, and other communities connected by trade. Sarajevo's mosques, churches, synagogues, bazaars, and Austro-Hungarian administrative buildings reflected layered history. Budapest promoted Magyar national culture while remaining home to Germans, Jews, Slovaks, and others. Vienna attracted migrants from the entire monarchy, becoming a city where accents revealed geography and opportunity. Food carried the map into kitchens. Viennese cuisine absorbed Bohemian pastries, Hungarian paprika dishes, Balkan influences, Italian techniques, and products moved through imperial trade. Goulash changed as it traveled. Strudel crossed linguistic borders. Coffeehouse culture reflected Ottoman encounters, Mediterranean commerce, and urban modernity, though popular legends about coffee captured after the Siege of Vienna are often simplified. The empire could fail constitutionally while succeeding deliciously. Language remained the most sensitive daily question because it combined dignity and power. A person's mother tongue might determine which school a child attended, which court heard a case, which newspaper shaped opinion, and whether a government career was possible. Census categories forced fluid identities into boxes. Bilingual people might choose differently depending on context. National activists accused others of artificial conversion or betrayal. Governments tried compromises, but every form, sign, classroom, and official announcement could become a political battlefield. The United States encountered similar questions through Habsburg immigration. Officials often failed to understand the difference between state nationality and ethnic identity. An immigrant might answer Hungarian, because that was the kingdom on a passport, Slovak, because that was the language at home, American, because that was the future, and Catholic or Jewish, because faith organized community. The Habsburg experience shows that identity is not a single permanent label. It is a stack of loyalties activated by circumstance. That truth helps explain both the monarchy's longevity and its sudden end. Before 1914, millions could live with layered identity because everyday institutions continued to function. War demanded exclusive sacrifice. Governments asked soldiers to die for a dynasty while national movements promised states of their own. Hunger made imperial symbolism feel empty. Military repression made loyalty dangerous. Allied recognition made independence plausible. Once enough officials and troops believed the future belonged to national councils rather than the emperor, collapse became self-accelerating. Long before modern advertising, the Habsburgs understood that power depended on images repeated until they became memory. Medieval seals showed rulers enthroned or armored, presenting legal authority to people who might never see them. Coins carried profiles across markets. Tombs arranged ancestors into a visible chain. Maximilian I expanded this practice with printing. He commissioned the Triumphal Arch, an enormous woodcut assembled from many sheets, filled with genealogy, victories, symbols, and claims. It was architecture made of paper, capable of traveling where a stone monument could not. His autobiographical projects, including Theurdank and Weiskönig, transformed political struggle into chivalric adventure. Maximilian often lacked money to complete campaigns, but he invested in the story of himself because stories could outlive unpaid bills. Genealogy was especially valuable to a family whose authority came through inheritance. Court historians traced the Habsburgs to ancient Romans, biblical figures, Trojans, and legendary heroes. The claims were historically impossible, but their purpose was not modern scholarship. They placed the dynasty inside universal time. A newly acquired title looked less accidental if the ruler could be portrayed as heir to the oldest traditions of Europe and Christianity. Frederick III's AIOU and Maximilian's genealogies were confidence projected against insecurity. Portraiture made marriage diplomacy possible. Before photography, a prince or princess might choose, or more often be assigned, a spouse based partly on a painted likeness. Artists were instructed to be flattering but recognizable. A portrait crossed borders accompanied by reports about health, character, fertility, religion, and manners. Hans Holbein's portraits for Henry VIII belong to this broader culture of dynastic inspection. Habsburg courts exchanged images constantly. A princess saw the face of a future husband in oil before seeing it across an altar. Titian became one of the supreme creators of Habsburg majesty. His portraits of Charles V balanced physical imperfection with imperial command. Charles's long face and jaw were not hidden, but posture, armor, color, and space turned them into distinction. In the equestrian portrait after Mulberg, the emperor appears alone, riding through a dim landscape with lance in hand. The painting avoids a chaotic battle scene. It presents victory as personal destiny. Yet viewers who know the history can see the fragility behind it. The religious settlement failed, the princes rebelled again, and Charles abdicated within a decade. Velázquez performed an even subtler operation for Philip IV. He painted the king repeatedly over decades, recording the aging of a man burdened by decline. In Las Meninas, the center seems to be the young Infanta Margarita Teresa, surrounded by attendants, dwarfs, a dog, a chaperone, and the artist himself. A mirror reflects Philip IV and Queen Mariana. The royal couple is both present and absent, watching and being watched. The painting turns court hierarchy into a puzzle of sight. It also preserves people often marginalized in official history, though still within structures that treated some bodies as curiosities or entertainment. Margarita Teresa herself became an instrument of Habsburg marriage. She was sent from Spain to Vienna to marry her maternal uncle, Emperor Leopold I. Portraits of her at different ages had kept the Austrian court informed as she grew. She died at 21 after repeated pregnancies. Only one of her children survived infancy. Her short life connected Spanish art, Austrian succession, and the biological costs of close-kin marriage. Court collections turned possession into a model of the world. Rudolf II's Kunstkammer included natural wonders and human creations arranged to demonstrate knowledge and mastery. Coral, shells, carved ivory, clocks, automata, minerals, paintings, and exotic objects stood together. Such collections contributed to the development of museums and scientific classification, but they also reflected global systems of extraction. Objects arrived through trade, diplomacy, conquest, missionary networks, and unequal encounters. The emperor's cabinet claimed symbolically to contain creation inside palace rooms. The Habsburg fascination with alchemy has often been mocked as foolishness. Rudolf II invited experimenters who sought to transmute metals or discover universal medicines. Some were frauds. Others practiced techniques related to early chemistry, metallurgy, medicine, and material science. The boundary between science and magic was not yet drawn where modern people place it. Astrology informed medical and political decisions. Kepler cast horoscopes while developing laws of planetary motion. Tycho Brahe combined precise observation with a worldview that still included celestial influence. Rudolph's court shows that knowledge advances through mixtures of ideas later separated into rational and irrational categories. Libraries were another form of sovereignty. Habsburg rulers collected manuscripts, maps, printed books, and music. The Imperial Court Library evolved into the Austrian National Library. Its magnificent Baroque hall, completed in the 18th century, placed Emperor Charles VI beneath a dome fresco that celebrated knowledge and imperial virtue. Shelves of books stood as evidence that the monarchy did not merely command territories. It organized memory. Archives served a more practical function. Treaties, privileges, marriage contracts, tax registers, military reports, and court cases allowed officials to defend claims centuries after their origin.